My first experience with Pacific herring was cut plugging with them in Langara Island when I was a young kid. And I didn't obviously think much of it as to what it is or the importance of the herring. All I could think of was, how to cut the head off at the right angle so that it would spin right, empty the guts out from the inside, rig up your mooching leader, and put it on an 8-ounce weight, drop it down 30 poles, and hopefully you just, sit there and watch and wait until a Chinook slams it and peels a bunch of line. And then ensues the age-old battle of man versus fish, probably since we've walked this earth. 20 years later, I'm living on the shores of one of the most concentrated herring spawns from Alaska down to Mexico. Every year, a commercial roe fishery takes place. For years, groups have been advocating to shut it down. Little did I realize the scale of this conflict right now, more than ever.
We talk about glaciation, that's what, 15,000 years ago. Where we are now is under ice, or 20,000 years ago. That's only 20,000. We're going back 1,000,000 years, not just 20,000 years. And you and I, we live for 70 to 100 years. So the changes that we have caused to the planet are huge and permanent. The abundances are at historic high levels. The science says you can effectively remove a percentage of the population without affecting its ability to reproduce itself. That's the science that's accepted all over the planet.
Do you believe fishing is sustainable?
No.
So, I guess to anyone who sees that video and is concerned or mad, what would you tell them? Like, should they be concerned or mad, or is it just...
I'd tell them to shove that chunk of sushi with colored small eggs into their mouth and be quiet.
So here's the history of our herring fishery in British Columbia. So we had a major fishery in the 40s for sardines or pilchard, and it collapsed in the 50s, or actually late 40s. And the herring catches increased through the 50s into the early 1960s. But each year, the fishery would catch more herring, and each year they'd be more abundant. So by the late 1950s, there was a statement made by a prominent scientist that you really can't overfish herring, because no matter how many we catch, you keep getting more. And you can see from the science that it seemed to be correct. And then what happens is that in the 60s, the abundances start to decline. And it was the fishermen that came to the scientists and said, the abundances are declining and we really need to cut back on fishing. And so the whole herring fishery was shut down in the mid-1960s. Essentially, it had collapsed. And that was the controversy, and that continued through to the early 1970s. Now, the end of the story was that herring gradually increased again, and as you heard this year, the Strait of Georgia, the abundances of herring are at historic high levels of abundance.
I love that word, science. You can get science to prove just about anything. I hate to be cynical, but I just don't. You look at that old story. 4 of the 5 are shut down. This is the last one. Take a look at the whole of the Strait of Georgia. The last of the Strait of Georgia is from Nanu's Bay to Comox. There used to be fisheries all around the Strait of Georgia, so all that's left from Alaska to Mexico, because Washington State fisheries shut down for herring, California fisheries is shut down for herring, the whole coast of BC shut down for herring. We've got one little run here left in part of what was originally the whole Strait of Georgia. What do you think the precautionary principle should be? Yeah.
And you have to separate allocation from the science. All right, so the science, the role of government science, the reason that you have government scientists is that they provide information to the minister. Now, so the science is being provided to the minister. The allocation is not anything that the scientists get involved with. Yeah, so in terms of, if I was still here and I provide advice to the minister, how the minister uses that advice is his business. If I provide advice and the minister doesn't accept it, that's not anything to do with me. It's not my job.
You know, because fisheries is government, right? And we can easily blame government for everything, but since the East Coast cod failure, Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been really super conservative in all their management. And we see that in our herring fishery because they're sort of in a fishbowl too, right? All their decisions are public decisions, and so yeah, they're ultra conservative, and we see it all in our salmon fisheries, and all our fisheries are you know, they just don't open the gates and say go catch all you want, boys, because they get a lot of criticism if they do that. So
like, I really see that people are talking about a difference of values, and that's not something that science measures. So the arguments that I hear from, you know, what I have read in the paper and heard from Grant Scott and, you know, folks like you know, Pacific Wilds, you know, they're talking about a fundamental difference in values, right? Than not wanting to have a fishery on a foreign species. It's like the department's job is to provide science advice and manage natural resources in alignment with the values of the people of Canada.
Right.
Right? To support economically prosperous fisheries and, you know, to support our economy and jobs. So, and I see it more as like not an argument of science, but an argument of objectives and values.
So the issue is that that fishing in general has been controversial over the history of fishing. Now, what's important about this discussion is it's controversial because we essentially don't understand the mechanisms, the fundamental mechanisms that regulate salmon, or fishing in general, and salmon in particular.
So this is last resort fishing here, but under the regulations you're allowed using cast nets and dip nets for herring. So we're dip netting for them, and I don't know. Oh, got one. I thought it'd be easier.
Oh my God, look at that.
All right, so we devised a plan where, oh my God, Deanna scares them from one direction and I net them from the other. Do you want to just, or here, one sec. Do you want to just try and do it now? Oh, that worked. Oh. Can you open the cooler? Fishing exists and always has existed. I think in the big picture we need to remind ourselves of the old fables we hear as kids. Aesop told the tale of a traveler who hired a man and his donkey to cross the desert. When the sun got hot, they both hid in the donkey's shadow, but there was only room for one. They both fought over the shadow, and as they fought, the donkey galloped away. Remind yourself that we are arguing over science that is 100 years old, yet we are still having the same social problems that Aesop wrote about 600 BC, thousands of years ago.